The summer sun lingered lazily over the sleepy town of Seabrook, South Carolina, painting everything in soft gold. The air was warm, thick with the scent of salt and magnolia blossoms. In this quiet coastal world, time seemed to slow down just enough for stories to take root. The rivers shimmered, the marshes hummed, and distant cicadas kept rhythm like a gentle chorus. It was the kind of place where love didn't arrive with a roar, but with a whisper that grew louder each day. And that summer a whisper became a storm. Two lives were about to collide in ways neither could foresee. Noah Calhoun lived on the edges of town, in a small wooden house shaded by towering oaks. His hands were rough from work, his clothes simple, his spirit quiet. He moved through his days with a steady rhythm, repairing fences, tending boats, watching sunsets like they were conversations with God. He had the kind of soul that belonged to the land, unrushed, grounded, patient. In Seabrook, Noah was known not for wealth but for the calm certainty in his eyes. He didn't chase the world. He let the world find him. And that summer it did. Allie Hamilton arrived in Seabrook like sunlight through open windows. She came from a world of elegant gardens and crisp white dresses, where evenings meant dinner parties and expectations pressed like iron. Her laughter carried easily, drawing eyes wherever she went. Allie was vibrant, curious, restless beneath her polished manners. Her family came to Seabrook for the season, hoping for quiet leisure away from the city. But Allie was not built for stillness. She was built for wonder. And one warm evening, wonder led her exactly where Noah stood waiting. It was at the summer carnival that their worlds first brushed against each other. Lights twinkled overhead, music filled the air, and the scent of popcorn and sawdust wrapped around the night. Allie, with her friends, moved through the crowd like a spark through dry grass. Noah spotted her on the Ferris wheel, her hair catching the light, her laughter rising like music above the noise. For a moment, time paused for him. He saw not just a pretty face, but a story he hadn't yet read. Something inside him stirred, steady and sure. Noah approached her with a courage he didn't know he had. The carnival spun around them, music, voices, wheels turning endlessly. He asked her to go out with him, bold and honest, and she laughed, not cruelly but surprised. They came from two different worlds, his simple, hers refined. Yet in that brief exchange, something unspoken passed between them. She walked away smiling, unaware of the way he'd already begun to build a space for her in his heart. Noah watched her disappear into the crowd, the night suddenly charged with possibility. The following days became a dance of near encounters. Seabrook was small, and summer had a way of bringing souls together. Noah found himself at the same places she visited, by the riverbank near the old theater, in the bustling town square. Allie noticed him too, though she pretended not to at first. Their eyes would meet across the noise and movement, like two magnets slowly drawing closer. Neither spoke much, but the air between them thickened with unspoken energy. The town, quiet and timeless, became their stage. One evening, Noah found Allie sitting alone near the docks, her feet dangling above the water. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange, reflecting off the river like fire. He sat beside her without asking, both of them silent as the world softened around them. The air smelled of salt and wood, their shoulders nearly touching. She glanced at him, amused by his quietness. He glanced at her, stunned by her light. In that silence, something real began. Not loud, but sure. It was the first thread of a love neither understood yet. As summer deepened, their encounters grew bolder. Noah invited Allie on a rowboat one afternoon, taking her through the winding creek surrounded by fields of white geese. The water reflected the sky like glass, broken only by their oars. Allie's laughter echoed over the water, mingling with the cries of distant birds. Noah listened, memorizing every sound, every smile, every movement. She belonged to a world he could never buy his way into, but for that afternoon the world didn't matter. It was just the two of them, drifting between sky and water. Allie found herself drawn to Noah in ways that defied the boundaries of class. His simplicity disarmed her. His honesty fascinated her. He didn't try to impress. He just existed fully, and it was enough. Around him, she could drop the polished edges her family required. She could laugh without calculation, speak without caution, exist without expectation. Her friends noticed the change, whispering about the quiet boy she kept meeting by the river. Allie brushed it off, but inside, something was already shifting. Summer had found its rhythm, and it was theirs. By the end of July, the world seemed to exist only in their shared glances, their stolen afternoons, their growing connection. Noah's heart beat with quiet certainty, while Allie's raced with newfound rebellion. They were from different worlds, but summer blurred the lines between them. The river held their secrets. The carnival lights remembered their laughter. Seabrook became their universe, suspended in warmth and time. Neither could have imagined how brief this perfect chapter would be. Love had bloomed, beautiful, fragile, unstoppable. The summer days unfolded like pages in a book they didn't want to end. Noah and Allie spent every spare moment together, drifting between the quiet riverbanks and the sunlit fields. Each morning brought them back to each other, like tides meeting the shore. Their conversations stretched for hours, spilling secrets, dreams, and laughter. In those moments, class expectations and the future all faded. It was as if Seabrook itself wrapped around them, protecting their fragile, blooming love. The world beyond their summer began to feel like a distant, irrelevant echo. Noah took Allie to hidden corners of Seabrook she had never seen before. Abandoned barns became their secret stages, moonlit docks their quiet confessionals. He showed her where the river curved into silence, where the stars reflected perfectly in still waters. She, in turn, shared her world of music, art, and ambition, painting dreams across his simple nights. Together they built a space that belonged only to them, half wild, half wonder. Each shared moment was a brick in the invisible house of love they were building. Neither wanted to imagine it collapsing. Their connection deepened not through grand gestures, but through small, deliberate acts. Allie brought him sketches of places they'd visited. Noah carved their initials into old wooden posts. They walked barefoot through warm summer rain, their clothes soaked, their laughter echoing through empty streets. They danced without music, sang songs they didn't know all the words to. The world reduced itself to the sound of their voices, the warmth of their hands. Each moment carried a weight they didn't fully understand yet. Love had anchored itself firmly in their lives. The town watched their romance with quiet curiosity. To some it was sweet, young love blooming beneath golden skies. To others it was a scandal waiting to happen. Allie's family moved in circles far removed from Noah's world. Whispers began at dinner tables, at church gatherings, at country clubs where Noah's name was never spoken. Her parents noticed her absence, her glowing smile, the shift in her behavior. They recognized the unmistakable signs of first love and grew uneasy. The summer romance was no longer invisible. Eyes had turned toward them. Allie's mother began to question her outings, her late returns, the mysterious joy that lingered in her voice. Her father listened with stern silence, already calculating the boundaries of propriety. They reminded her of expectations, of future engagements and family reputation. Allie listened politely, nodding, but her mind was always elsewhere, by the river in Noah's rowboat beneath the stars. Their world felt heavy and distant, compared to the lightness she shared with him. Love made her brave, but reality loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. Their secret world was no longer theirs alone. One evening, Noah took Allie to an abandoned house he had always admired. The moonlight fell through broken windows, lighting the dust in soft, floating particles. He spoke of restoring it someday, making it their home, filling it with music and laughter. She wandered through the empty rooms, imagining their lives in every corner. Paintings on the walls, a piano in the corner, children's footsteps on wooden floors. It was a fantasy, fragile but intoxicating. In that house they allowed themselves to dream boldly. Love turned possibilities into promises. Their love burned brighter as the summer deepened. Days became longer, nights shorter, as if time itself bent to their will. They rode through moonlit waters, whispered secrets under trees, traced stars like constellations only they could name. Noah's steadiness met Allie's fire, creating a balance neither had known before. In each other, they found both freedom and belonging. The world beyond Seabrook receded like a fading tide. Their love became everything, unquestioned, unchallenged, absolute. But the outside world was patient, waiting for its turn to speak. Allie's parents, after weeks of observing, decided to intervene. They saw the summer romance as dangerous, an indulgence that threatened their daughter's carefully planned future. Noah to them was kind but unsuitable. No wealth, no status, no place in their vision for her life. Letters were exchanged, conversations whispered late at night. Plans began to form to separate what summer had bound together. Love was about to meet resistance head-on. The tension surfaced on a warm August evening. Allie returned home later than usual, cheeks flushed from laughter, hair tangled by wind. Her parents were waiting. The conversation that followed cracked the carefree world she had built with Noah. Their disapproval was sharp, their instructions clear. She tried to argue, to defend what she felt, but their voices carried years of authority she couldn't ignore. In that moment, Summer's glow dimmed. She realized love would have to fight to survive. Noah sensed the change in the air before words were spoken. Allie grew quieter, her smiles tinged with worry. They met by the river, holding each other longer than usual, both aware of something closing in. Their time together began to feel precious in a way it hadn't before, finite, fragile. The season was changing, and so was everything else. Their love remained strong, but the world around them had woken up. And once the world notices love, it rarely leaves it alone. The summer air grew heavier, the golden haze slowly giving way to storm clouds. Allie's parents no longer spoke in whispers. Their disapproval had become open and relentless. Every outing, every moment she spent away was questioned, monitored, controlled. Noah felt the shift like a cold wind cutting through warmth. The carefree days they'd shared began to shrink under the weight of expectation. What once felt infinite now felt borrowed, as if time itself had turned against them. Love had not faded, but the world had arrived to claim its due. Noah, unused to the world of rules and judgments, found himself pushed into corners he didn't understand. Allie's father invited him to dinner once, a silent performance that measured his worth in every glance. The fine china, polished silver, and stiff smiles stood in contrast to his plain clothes and calloused hands. He spoke honestly, as he always did, but honesty wasn't the currency that bought acceptance in that house. He left feeling small, unwelcome, and painfully aware of the invisible walls between their worlds. Allie saw it too, her heart aching at the distance being drawn. Arguments began to fill the Hamilton household. Allie's laughter turned to frustration, her quiet rebellion to loud defiance. She fought for her love like someone clinging to sunlight as clouds gathered overhead. Her mother called it foolishness. Her father called it dangerous. To them, Noah was a summer fling, a chapter meant to end when the season did. But to Allie, he was everything. Her voice rose, her tears fell, but nothing shifted their stance. They had written her future long before Noah appeared. Love had interrupted their script, and they wanted it gone. Noah tried to remain calm, to give her strength when the world tried to tear them apart. He held her close by the river one evening as the sun set, his voice steady even as his heart clenched. He told her he would fight for her always. She believed him, but fear crept in through the edges of their certainty. The future they dreamed of suddenly felt fragile against forces so much bigger than them. Their love was strong, but summer was ending. And with it, their time in this untouched world. The night her parents announced their decision was warm but tense. They told her they were leaving Seabrook immediately, cutting the summer short. She would return to the city, to their world of polished expectations and quiet control. Allie felt the ground fall away beneath her. She ran to Noah's house, breathless, desperate, the stars overhead spinning as fast as her thoughts. He met her outside, reading her panic before she spoke. The world had caught them, and there was no pretending anymore. Tomorrow she would be gone. Their last night together became a swirl of emotion neither would forget. They walked through the woods, through fields where their laughter once echoed. They rode one final time under the moon, water shimmering like tears. Words spilled from them, promises, pleas, declarations made through shaking voices. They held each other tightly, trying to memorize the shape of love before the world tore it apart. The night smelled like summer rain, but it felt like farewell. Neither wanted to say the word, both knew it anyway. When morning came, reality stood waiting like an unmovable wall. Allie's suitcases were packed, her parents determined. She searched for Noah one last time, needing to see him, needing to say goodbye. But emotions ran high, words tangled, and their final meeting turned into a painful argument. Hurt mixed with fear, love with desperation. She drove away in tears, his figure growing smaller in the rearview mirror. He stood in the road, helpless, as the car carried away everything he loved. Summer had ended, and so had their world. In the days that followed, Noah returned to their familiar places, now hollow echoes of what once was. The docks, the abandoned house, the carnival grounds, all felt heavy with memory. He wrote to her every day, pouring his heart into words, believing love could cross distance. But her parents intercepted the letters, hiding them away, leaving Allie to believe silence had replaced his love. The days stretched into weeks, then months, each unanswered letter carving a deeper wound. Hope slowly faded, replaced by a quiet ache. Allie, back in her parents' world, tried to bury the summer in polite conversations and social events. Suitors appeared, polished and proper, each one approved and encouraged. She smiled when she needed to, but her heart never returned fully. Noah's absence wasn't just a gap. It was a ghost that followed her through hallways and crowded rooms. She waited for a letter that never came, unaware that his love was still reaching for her, lost in the space between their worlds. The memory of Seabrook lingered like a half-heard melody. Noah stayed in Seabrook, carrying her memory like a secret fire. He repaired the old house, worked long days, wrote letters that would never be read. Seasons turned. The geese returned and left again. Time passed, but his love remained steady, unwavering, a silent promise waiting for its moment. Across the miles, Allie lived a life built for her, not by her. But love, even silenced, has a way of enduring. Their story wasn't over. It was simply waiting. The years slipped by quietly, carrying with them the echoes of a summer that refused to die. Noah remained in Seabrook, rooted like the oaks that lined the riverbanks. His hands grew rougher, his shoulders broader, his silence deeper. But within him something remained untouched, a memory of laughter under moonlight, of a girl with a fire in her eyes. He tried to move forward, but love doesn't always follow time's rules. Seasons changed, faces changed, but Allie's presence lingered like perfume in an empty room. She was both his past and his compass. He threw himself into work, channeling his longing into something tangible. The abandoned house they had explored together became his obsession. Day after day he restored it board by board, nail by nail. He remembered every detail she had imagined: the white paint, the wraparound porch, the big windows facing the river. It was as if building the house meant keeping their love alive, one plank at a time. Locals watched in silence, some with admiration, others with pity. But Noah never explained. He built quietly for her, even if she would never return. The house rose like a promise fulfilled, shining with new life under the southern sun. It stood tall against the backdrop of the river, both proud and haunting. Noah poured everything into it, his savings, his sweat, his years. It wasn't just a house. It was a monument to a love he refused to forget. Late at night, he would sit on the porch and stare out at the water, imagining her walking toward him. The wind would stir, the trees would sway, and for a moment the world would feel like that summer again. Far away, Allie's life followed the path her parents had drawn. She attended university, surrounded by polished halls and endless expectations. Suitors came and went, but none stayed in her heart. Her days were filled with lectures and dances, her nights with quiet thoughts she never voiced aloud. Noah's face would appear unbidden, like a flash of light in a darkened room. She tried to brush it aside, convincing herself it was only youth, only summer. But love leaves marks that time can't erase, no matter how far one travels. Then she met Lon Hammond Jr., handsome, wealthy, charming, the perfect match in her parents' eyes. He courted her with grace and certainty, his world polished and familiar. Allie let herself be swept into his rhythm, believing that maybe this was what love was supposed to look like. He fit the future she was raised for, even if he didn't touch the deepest parts of her soul. Her friends envied her. Her parents beamed with pride. She smiled when required, nodded when expected, and told herself she was happy. But late at night her heart wandered elsewhere. Years continued their quiet march forward. Noah's letters had long since stopped, not from lack of love, but from the silence that returned them. He assumed she had moved on, built a life that had no room for a boy from Seabrook. So he lived simply, avoiding the world beyond his town. The house stood finished, perfect, waiting like a silent sentinel. People offered to buy it. He refused every time. It wasn't just property, it was the story of his heart carved into wood and stone. He couldn't sell that. He wouldn't. Allie's engagement to Lon was celebrated with champagne and carefully crafted smiles. He was everything she had been told to want, dependable, sophisticated, admired. Yet in quiet moments doubt lingered like fog on still water. She looked at her ring and wondered why her heart didn't race the way it once had. Her parents spoke of plans and prestige. She nodded and agreed. But at night, her dreams carried her back to a river, to laughter, to a boy with steady hands and honest eyes. She told no one. Some loves live in silence. One day, while trying on her wedding dress, Allie's eyes drifted to a newspaper resting nearby. On the front page was a photograph of Noah, standing proudly in front of the house they'd dreamed of together. The headline spoke of restoration and determination, but Allie saw something else, her past staring back at her in sharp, undeniable focus. Her heart clenched. memories flooding in like a storm breaking through a dam. Years of carefully built walls began to crack. Fate had not forgotten what summer once created. She stared at that photograph for a long time, longer than anyone noticed. The house was exactly as she had imagined, every detail whispering her name. Questions swirled in her mind. Why now? Why him? Why did her heart still react as if no time had passed? She folded the paper carefully, as if handling something fragile. Her world with Lon suddenly felt smaller, less certain, like a story written for someone else. Noah's image had reopened a door she thought was locked forever. Love had found its way back through ink and memory. In Seabrook, Noah continued his quiet life, unaware that his photograph had crossed her path. He chopped wood, repaired boats, and watched the river as he always did. But something in the air felt different, as if the world had begun holding its breath again. The house stood waiting, patient as ever. Noah didn't know it yet, but the past he had loved so fiercely was turning toward him once more. And when love stirs after years of silence, the world shifts to make room. Allie stared at the newspaper photo until the room around her blurred. The house, his face, it was like a chapter she had closed, had quietly reopened itself, demanding to be read again. She felt something stir deep within her, something she thought time had buried. Lon spoke to her about wedding plans, but his words floated like distant echoes. Her heart was somewhere else, back in Seabrook by the river under a summer sky. She tried to dismiss it, but love has a way of refusing to be ignored. The pull was undeniable, silent and strong. She told herself it was just curiosity, a simple visit before her new life began. She needed closure, clarity, answers that only time and distance had left unspoken. Packing a small bag, she slipped away quietly, her fiancé unaware of the storm gathering within her. The drive to Seabrook felt like traveling backward through her own memories. Each mile peeled away layers of the life she'd built since leaving. The closer she got, the heavier her heart became. Nostalgia and fear rode beside her, uninvited but impossible to silence. When she arrived, Seabrook looked both familiar and different. The same marshes stretched wide beneath the sun, the same streets wound through town, but everything seemed quieter, older, as if waiting. And there it was, the house. White paint gleaming, porch wide, windows shining like it had been built yesterday. She stopped the car and sat for a long moment, hands gripping the wheel. Her heart pounded with a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. She had imagined this moment, but reality felt sharper. She had come for answers. She didn't know she'd find herself. Noah was on the porch when she stepped out. For a moment, time fractured. The years melted, leaving only the weight of shared memories between them. He looked older, steadier. His quiet strength deepened. She looked different too, more composed, more polished, but her eyes held the same spark he had never forgotten. They stood there, neither moving, as if afraid that speaking might break the fragile bridge time had rebuilt. The wind rustled the trees, filling the silence with the soft sound of something familiar returning. Their first words were hesitant, like stepping onto uncertain ground. Noah's voice carried warmth and disbelief. Allie's held tremors she couldn't hide. She explained why she came, at least the part she could admit to herself. He listened without judgment, as he always had. The house stood between them like a shared dream made real. Every board, every window, every corner whispered their past back to them. It wasn't just a structure. It was their story, standing tall, waiting for them to walk inside. He invited her in, and the moment she crossed the threshold, memories flooded her senses. She ran her fingers along the banister they once imagined, stood in the room where they once dreamed. Everything was exactly as she'd described all those years ago. It was like stepping into a vision brought to life, but more real, more overwhelming. She felt her breath catch as she turned to him, tears welling without warning. Noah watched her quietly, knowing words weren't needed. This house had said everything for him. They spent the afternoon talking, laughing awkwardly, rediscovering the rhythms they'd lost. Old jokes surfaced, stories spilled, and silences felt less like walls and more like pauses in familiar songs. The years between them began to soften, replaced by something both fragile and powerful. Noah listened to her speak of her life, her engagement, her uncertainty. She listened to his quiet tales of years spent building and waiting. Underneath every word, the same current ran strong, the love they'd left unfinished. As the sun began to sink, Noah suggested they go on the water, just like they had that unforgettable summer. The boat slid across the river as if time had folded in on itself. White geese surrounded them, the water still and shimmering like glass. Allie laughed freely, the sound shocking even her. Noah watched her with quiet wonder, as if seeing something he'd never forgotten but thought he might never hear again. The river held their history. The sky held their future. For a moment, nothing else existed. Rain began to fall suddenly, soft at first, then pouring. They were soaked, laughing, spinning the boat around like children. But beneath the laughter lay an undeniable pull, a current drawing them closer. The rain blurred the world until it was just the two of them. Wet clothes, soaked hair, pounding hearts. Allie met his gaze, and the years of separation dissolved in that single look. The distance that time had built crumbled under the weight of something that had never truly left. When they returned to the house, soaked and breathless, the air between them changed. It was no longer filled with hesitation, but with something deeper, stronger, unspoken. Noah lit a fire, their wet clothes steaming in the warmth. They sat close, the silence heavy with shared memories and unresolved love. Allie looked at him and saw not just her past, but a version of herself she had lost. He looked at her and saw the only future he'd ever imagined. Fate had brought them back together. The question now was, what would they do with it? The days that followed unfolded like a dream Allie thought she'd forgotten. What began as a simple visit stretched longer, the world outside Seabrook fading like distant noise. She told herself she would stay only a day or two, but every morning the sight of the house, the river, and Noah's steady presence anchored her. Each conversation peeled back layers of time, revealing pieces of the girl she had once been. She felt her carefully constructed future trembling under the weight of memory. Love, once buried, was stirring like roots beneath thawing ground. Allie explored the house with Noah, each room a story they had imagined years ago. He showed her how he rebuilt it, the careful attention, the relentless work, the way he remembered every word she'd said. She was overwhelmed by the devotion carved into wood and paint. In the evenings, they sat on the porch watching the sun melt into the river. The quiet between them was no longer awkward. It was rich with shared history. Every glance carried echoes of that summer. It was as if the years apart had been a long pause in a song they both still knew. Noah kept his distance at first, aware she wore another man's ring. But his eyes betrayed him, softening each time she laughed, deepening each time she looked away. Allie felt it too, an invisible thread pulling them closer with every shared moment. She caught herself lingering, her heart racing unexpectedly. Her fiancé existed like a shadow in her mind, distant, logical, approved. Noah was here, alive, tangible, everything her heart had once chosen without hesitation. She stood between two worlds, one built for her and one she had built herself. One afternoon, they rode bikes through the town, retracing paths they had once run barefoot. The locals watched quietly, recognizing something timeless in the way they moved together. Laughter echoed down streets lined with oaks, carrying a sense of something lost and found again. They ended up at the old theater, now abandoned and dusty. Allie stood inside, remembering their first shy encounters, the warmth of youth, the spark that had started everything. Time folded inward, and for a moment the world around them disappeared entirely. Only they remained. The tension between them grew like a slow, inevitable tide. At night, Allie lay awake in her room, torn between duty and desire. Lawn represented security, a future drawn in straight, elegant lines. Noah represented everything real and unpredictable, a love that burned without permission. She traced the ring on her finger, feeling its weight differently now. Her heart remembered something her mind had tried to forget. The walls she had built began to crack, and the sound of those cracks grew louder with each passing hour. Noah, meanwhile, wrestled with his own emotions. He had spent years building a life with her absence, convincing himself he had moved on, but her presence reignited everything he thought he had contained. He tried to keep things simple, to respect the boundaries she had set. But love rarely obeys rules. He found himself looking for her in every moment, listening for her footsteps, memorizing her laughter again. The house he built suddenly felt alive, no longer waiting but breathing. One warm evening they went rowing again, this time under a sky painted in pink and gold. The river held them gently, the geese gliding alongside like silent witnesses. They spoke about their lives, their choices, their pain. Noah's voice was steady, but beneath it, emotion simmered. Allie felt her defenses weaken with every word, as if the current itself was drawing her closer to him. The boat drifted unhurried, and the air thickened with something that had never really left. It was love, quiet, patient, waiting. Rain began to fall again, soft at first, then pouring like a familiar memory returning in full force. Neither of them moved to leave. Instead, they laughed, soaked through, their voices rising over the storm. Allie's heart pounded as Noah looked at her with the same unwavering gaze he had years ago. This time, she didn't look away. In that downpour, surrounded by water and sky, the past collided with the present. It wasn't planned or polite. It was raw, undeniable, and alive. When they returned to the house, dripping and breathless, silence hung between them like charged air before lightning. Noah lit a fire, their wet clothes steaming in the glow. Allie watched him, seeing not just the boy she loved, but the man he had become. He had built a life of patience, of devotion, without ever asking anything in return. She felt the walls inside her finally crumble. The distance between them closed, not with words, but with something far more powerful. Love reclaimed the space it had once owned. As night deepened, they found themselves in each other's arms, no longer bound by fear or time. Years of longing unraveled in moments of closeness, as if their souls had waited patiently for this reunion. Allie wasn't thinking of consequences or rings or expectations. She was thinking only of him, of them, of a love that had never truly died. The house stood around them, not as a monument anymore, but as a living witness to a story reignited. The storm outside raged. Inside, something even more powerful had returned. The morning after their reunion arrived slowly, sunlight filtering through curtains like a quiet reminder of reality. Allie lay in Noah's arms, wrapped in warmth she hadn't felt in years. The house smelled of wood and rain, their laughter from the night before lingering in the air like a soft echo. But beneath the calm, thoughts churned. The world beyond those walls had not disappeared. It had simply waited. Her fiancé, her family, her carefully arranged future still existed. And with each passing second, their silence grew louder. She sat by the window, watching the river as her heart warred against itself. Noah was behind her, calm but aware, his presence both comforting and weighty. What they had reignited wasn't fleeting, it was fierce, alive, undeniable. But outside this house, decisions waited. Allie thought of Lon's kindness, his stability, the life she had agreed to share with him. She thought of Noah's devotion. The years of love poured into wood and memory. It was a battle between certainty and truth, between safety and fire. Noah sensed her turmoil without needing to ask. He didn't pressure her, didn't demand answers. He had loved her once without guarantees. He was prepared to do so again. But he also knew this was no longer a summer fling. This was real, with consequences that stretched beyond Seabrook. Allie turned to him, tears in her eyes, searching for something. Permission, direction, strength. He offered only quiet honesty, the same as he always had. The choice was hers and hers alone. Meanwhile, Lon had begun to sense something was wrong. Her sudden departure, her vague explanations, the absence of phone calls, it all weighed on him. He loved her in his own way, perhaps less fiercely than Noah, but no less sincerely. He decided to follow his instincts. Boarding a train, he set off for Seabrook, unaware of the storm he was walking into. Love stories rarely remain untouched by the world outside. His arrival would bring everything Allie had tried to avoid into sharp, undeniable focus. Back in Seabrook, Allie spent the day with Noah, trying to hold on to the simplicity of their rekindled love. They walked through the fields, shared quiet meals, rode the boat under clear skies. Everything felt perfect in fragments, but she couldn't shake the ticking clock in her mind. Every laugh felt precious because it might be their last. Noah noticed her growing quiet but said nothing. He had always known she lived between two worlds. He just didn't know which one she would choose. That evening, Allie stood alone in the house, running her hands along the walls Noah had built. Each plank carried his devotion, each corner whispered their shared past. She looked down at her engagement ring, its sparkle suddenly sharp and foreign. Lon represented a future her parents had crafted. Noah represented the future her heart had chosen long ago. She whispered his name into the empty room, her voice trembling with both love and fear. The house, their witness, held its breath with her. Lon arrived in Seabrook just as the sun was setting, his car pulling up to a hotel on the edge of town. He asked questions, followed quiet leads, and eventually found his way toward Noah's house. The closer he got, the heavier his heart became. He had imagined many scenarios, but seeing her in another man's world would test him in ways he wasn't prepared for. The town itself seemed to hum with anticipation. Love triangles aren't quiet. They ripple through the air like thunder before rain. Allie and Noah were on the porch when Lon's car appeared at the end of the path. She froze, the color draining from her face. Noah followed her gaze, understanding everything in an instant. Lon stepped out, composed but shaken, his eyes taking in the house, the porch, the unmistakable intimacy between them. The silence that followed was heavy, a collision of worlds that could no longer be separated. Allie stood between them, heart pounding, caught at the center of her own story. The conversation that followed was quiet but charged, every word carrying the weight of years and choices. Lon spoke with grace, but his pain showed in every glance. Noah remained steady, refusing to back away from what he felt. Allie's heart raced as she watched two versions of her future stand before her, waiting for her voice to decide. She had avoided this moment for as long as she could. Now it had arrived, unflinching and absolute. There would be no going back from what came next. As night settled, Allie retreated into the house alone, overwhelmed by the enormity of what lay before her. The fire crackled softly, throwing warm light across the room. She sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Both men waited outside in their own ways, one patient and steadfast, the other wounded but unwavering. Allie realized no choice would leave everyone unscarred. Love once reignited demands truth, and the truth was about to reshape all three of their lives. The house was silent, but Allie's thoughts roared like a storm. She sat by the window, watching the rain roll down the glass, each drop mirroring the weight in her chest. Two men, two lives, two versions of herself. Lon represented everything she had been raised to choose: safety, status, acceptance. Noah represented everything her heart had chosen without permission: passion, honesty, belonging. She pressed her forehead to the cool pain, whispering to herself as if the night might answer her. But the choice was hers alone. Lon stood outside, rain soaking through his suit, watching the light flicker inside the house. He had followed her out of love, not suspicion, but what he saw had shaken him. Allie's absence, her laughter with Noah, the familiar way she moved in that house, it told him everything words hadn't. He didn't storm in or rage. He simply waited, a man standing on the edge of losing everything he thought was secure. In his silence there was both pain and dignity. He loved her enough to hear the truth, even if it broke him. Noah remained nearby, quieter than usual. He didn't try to win her with speeches or grand gestures. His love had never needed to compete. It had only ever needed to be real. He walked the porch, hands in his pockets, the rain falling steadily. He knew this was a battle he couldn't fight for her. Her decision would shape both of their futures, and whatever she chose, he would accept it. Still, hope flickered inside him like a stubborn flame. He had built this house for her heart. He could only wait to see if it would return. Allie paced through the rooms like a ghost haunting her own memories. The walls held every laugh, every whisper, every dream they had built together long ago. She ran her hands over the furniture, tracing the edges of a love that had never died. She pictured a life here, paintings on the walls, children playing on the porch, growing old beside the river. It wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was real, built board by the man outside. Her tears fell freely. This was not just a choice between men. It was a choice between lives. She returned to her room and pulled out her wedding dress, still folded neatly in its box. The fabric felt smooth and cold against her hands. Lon was waiting for her in the city, expecting certainty, expecting her future to fit into the lines they had drawn together. She imagined walking down the aisle, smiling for photographs, living a life planned for her. It was beautiful in its own way, safe, respectable, admired. But as she held the dress, it felt like a costume meant for someone else. Her heart beat louder than the rain outside. Downstairs, Lon finally stepped into the house, dripping water onto the floor. His eyes were tired, not angry. He asked her to speak honestly, to tell him where her heart truly lay. Allie looked at him and saw not an enemy, but a man who loved her deeply in his own way. She felt guilt and gratitude intertwined painfully. He deserved honesty, not hesitation. Her voice trembled as she admitted the depth of her confusion, the power of what she had rediscovered. Lon listened, his jaw tight, his eyes soft. He already knew the answer. He just needed to hear it. Noah entered quietly afterward, his presence grounding. He didn't ask for explanations, didn't demand a verdict. He simply looked at her the way he always had, without expectation, without judgment. Allie's breath caught. She was standing between two forms of love, one built on certainty, the other on destiny. Her heart pulled toward him like the tide to the shore. He didn't need to say a word. The house, the river, the rain, all seemed to lean toward him too. The world had drawn its line. She had to step across it. The rain intensified as Allie stepped outside, both men waiting, one near the porch, the other by the car. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drum. For a moment the world held still. She saw Lon's patience, Noah's quiet hope, and her own reflection caught between them. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered to herself, "Who am I and where do I belong?" The wind whipped her hair, the rain soaked through her dress, and the choice she had avoided for so long rose before her, unflinching and final. She walked toward Lon first, her footsteps slow, deliberate. His eyes searched hers, looking for something: hope, apology, closure. She thanked him for his love, for his understanding, for his patience. He nodded, his face breaking just enough to reveal the pain beneath. He had loved her with reason, but she was a woman born for something less measured. They embraced like two souls who had shared a chapter, but not a destiny. He let her go with quiet dignity, understanding that love sometimes means stepping aside. Allie turned to Noah, her heart surging as their eyes met through the rain. In that moment, every hesitation fell away. She walked toward him not as the girl he once loved, but as the woman who had chosen him fully. He opened his arms and she ran into them, the storm breaking around them like applause. Their kiss carried years of silence, longing, and fate colliding at last. The house stood behind them like a witness to promises fulfilled. She had made her choice, not with fear but with a heart set free. The storm that night washed the world clean, leaving behind a sky sharp and bright. Noah and Allie stood on the porch, drenched but laughing, their hearts unburdened for the first time in years. She had chosen him, not out of rebellion but out of truth. In his arms, she felt the quiet certainty she'd always searched for. Around them, the house glowed softly in the lantern light, a living symbol of everything they had endured. Fate had brought them back, but it was love that kept them standing there, breathing the same night air once again. The days that followed were unlike anything they'd known before. They no longer lived in the past, replaying what had been lost. Instead, they began weaving a new life together, moment by moment. Allie unpacked her things slowly, claiming corners of the house as her own. Noah watched with quiet joy as she filled the empty spaces with color and laughter. The house, once waiting, now lived and breathed with their shared presence. It wasn't just memory anymore. It was home, built for a future they could finally face together. They spent their mornings on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the river drift lazily under the sun. The geese passed overhead in their familiar patterns, the world around them settling into a peaceful rhythm. In the afternoons they walked through town, no longer hiding, their fingers intertwined as though no time had ever separated them. People greeted them warmly, some with knowing smiles, others with gentle curiosity. Their story had once been a whispered legend. Now it simply belonged to them. Love had found its place again, quietly and firmly. Allie wrote to her parents, explaining her decision with grace and finality. She spoke of a love that never left her, of a future she could no longer deny. The letters were met with mixed emotions: shock, disappointment, reluctant acceptance. But Allie had made her choice, and for the first time she didn't waver beneath their expectations. She stood tall beside Noah, her heart rooted where it had always belonged. The life ahead of them wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made it extraordinary. Together, they carved out a new beginning. As the months passed, the house became a reflection of their shared dreams. Allie painted, her canvases filling the walls with color and life. Noah restored the gardens, coaxing wildflowers and vines back into bloom. The two of them worked side by side, building not just a home but a world. At night, they lay beneath the stars, whispering about the years they lost and the ones they were determined to live fully. The air between them carried the weight of both memory and promise. Love wasn't just rekindled, it was thriving. Time, however, moved as it always does, quietly, persistently. The seasons turned, their hair grew streaked with silver, and the rhythms of their days shifted. They celebrated small anniversaries, danced barefoot in the kitchen, watched storms from the porch wrapped in blankets. They argued and made up, grew tired and grew closer. Their love aged like the wood of the house, strong, warm, etched with stories. Years unfolded not as a fairy tale, but as something deeper, an enduring bond that had withstood distance, choice, and time itself. Their story became woven into the fabric of Seabrook. Locals pointed out the house with quiet admiration, telling newcomers about the couple who found their way back after years apart. Noah and Allie didn't seek attention. Their love wasn't a spectacle, but a presence. The town changed around them, but their home remained a constant, porch lights glowing at dusk, laughter drifting across the river. Their lives became proof of something rare, love that returns, survives, and stays. In a world that often moved too fast, they were unshakably still. As they grew older, subtle shifts began to appear in Allie's demeanor. Moments of forgetfulness, slight hesitations, a name lost here and there. Noah noticed first, quietly watching, his heart tightening with worry he didn't voice. She brushed it off as age, as exhaustion, and for a while he let her. But in the quiet moments between conversations, he saw shadows crossing her bright eyes. He knew their story was entering a new chapter, one neither of them could rewrite. Love had conquered distance. Now it faced time itself. He began to write their story down, page by page, capturing every detail. The summer they met, the house, the rain, the choices, the years. He didn't write for others. He wrote for her. He imagined a day when she might need those words to find her way back to him. Late at night, under a dim lamp, he poured their history onto paper with hands that trembled slightly more than they used to. The notebook grew thick, filled with memories bound in ink and love. It became his quiet act of devotion. In those moments, as autumn winds rustled the trees and the house glowed with lamplight, their love settled into something timeless. They had walked through youth, passion, pain, and choice. Now they stood together in the soft twilight of their years, holding hands like they always had, facing the unknown as one. The world around them changed, but their bond remained steady and unshaken. Their story wasn't over. It was simply moving into its most fragile, beautiful chapter yet, the one that would test the strength of love against the quiet erosion of memory. The years gathered gently around Noah and Allie like a soft blanket, woven with decades of laughter and quiet moments. Their home stood unchanged, a steady sentinel watching the river flow. But time had touched them both in ways no love could prevent. Allie's moments of forgetfulness grew longer, more frequent, like shadows stretching across a sunny day. There were times she looked at Noah with confusion, searching for a face she once knew by heart. He never grew angry. He simply held her hand patient, waiting for her to find him again. The diagnosis came quietly, with gentle words from doctors that carried heavy truths. Allie's memory would continue to slip, slowly, like sand through open fingers. Noah listened, his heart aching with the weight of inevitability, but he did not break. He went home that night, opened the notebook he had filled, and began to read it aloud to her. Each page held their story, every summer laugh, every tear, every choice. He read not as a man desperate, but as one devoted. The story they lived became their lifeline. Allie listened politely at first, smiling at the kindness of the old man reading her a love story. But as the words unfolded, something deep within her stirred. Her eyes softened, her fingers tightened around his, and for brief moments she remembered. She saw Seabrook again, the carnival lights, the rain on the river, the house built with love. She saw herself young and wild, saw him steady and sure. The memories came in bursts, fragile but luminous. Each time Noah caught his breath, witnessing love pierce through the fog. He visited her every day, notebook in hand, sitting beside her bed in the nursing home. His body was slower now, his steps careful, but his love had not faded an inch. The staff watched him with quiet reverence. They had seen devotion before, but never like this. He read with a steady voice, turning each page like a prayer. Some days she knew him immediately, her eyes lighting up like sunrise. Other days she drifted, lost in the spaces between memory and silence. He never stopped coming. Love for him was constant. On a rare golden afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the window, he began the story once more. He read about the night they reunited, soaked in rain and love, about the choice she made in the storm. His voice trembled with age, but the emotion was ageless. As he read, something miraculous happened. Allie's gaze cleared. Recognition bloomed like a flower after rain, and she whispered his name. In that instant, the years folded, and they were Noah and Allie again, not old, not lost, but home. She asked him softly if their love was real, her voice tinged with wonder and disbelief. Noah's eyes filled with tears as he took her hands in his. He told her the truth, that it had always been real, every moment, every heartbeat, every choice. She leaned her forehead against his, tears mingling with laughter, as the weight of forgotten years briefly lifted. The room filled with something unexplainable, a light, a warmth, a stillness. It was as if love itself had stepped inside to stand with them. Night fell gently, wrapping the world in quiet. Noah stayed by her side as he always did, even after visiting hours ended. The nurses found them sitting together, holding hands as the stars pressed against the dark sky outside. He refused to leave, unwilling to let her face the night alone. He climbed into the bed beside her, their hands intertwined, their breathing sinking like it had countless times before. In that small room, surrounded by whispers of their past, love stood firm against time's quiet march. Allie drifted to sleep with her head resting against his shoulder, a peaceful smile on her face. Noah stayed awake a little longer, watching her as if imprinting the moment into his soul. He thought of the boy he'd been, of the girl who had laughed under carnival lights, of the rain that had brought them together again. He whispered to her softly, promising that even if her mind forgot, his heart never would. The night held them gently, the world outside fading into silence. In the early hours of the morning, a nurse entered the room and found them lying together, still holding hands. Their breaths were shallow, soft, almost synchronized. The world had finally given them a quiet moment of mercy. Side by side they had walked through every storm, every separation, every test, and now side by side they faced the final dawn. Love, stronger than memory, stronger than time, had kept them together to the very end. The sun rose slowly, painting the room in gold. The notebook lay on the bedside table, its pages filled with the story of two souls who found each other, lost each other, and found each other again. The world outside carried on, unaware of the love that had defied time within those walls. Their hands remained intertwined, their hearts at peace. The story had come full circle, not with grand gestures but with quiet devotion. And in that stillness, their love became eternal.